All right, so now we're moving into the lower limbs and the lower part of the appendicular skeleton. So we'll start with the pelvis, or another word for it is the pelvic girdle. In your note packet that you got, there's my type notes, and obviously we'll do some notes in class, but just try to go over everything here and show you a few different pictures and a few different angles of what we're looking at here. But anyway, pelvis made of um, basically two big flared hip bones. Okay. And these things, this big one here and this big one here, are actually made of three separate bones. They're called the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. But if I take all those things after they fuse together, we call them the cocci, COXAE. But really, it's like this. Okay, so you see the yellow part is the upper flared portion, that's the ilium. The part towards the front is the pubis. This purple part is the ischium. So actually, when you're sitting in your chair, if you're sitting straight up and down and you're sitting on your butt, you're basically resting all your weight on the bottom of the ischium. It's called the ischial tuberosity, this very bottom portion of the ischium. Then the back portion of the pelvis is formed by our sacrum and our coccyx. So this is an anterior view. This is looking at it from the back. That's why you can see the sacrum and the coccyx a little bit better from this angle. So what is the job of the pelvis? Pelvis protects our internal organs. It forms a nice, neat little cage in here, protects our internal reproductive organs. It also attaches our lower limbs or our legs to the bottom half of our body, or excuse me, attaches it to our trunk, I should say. Okay. So a lot of things you need to know here. Let's go over the highlights. I already talked about the different bones that make it up and where you see those. A few structures in here that you need to be aware of. First of all, this is a really important joint right here. It's called the sacroiliac joint. Let's see if I can get my pointer up. Turn on laser pointer. There we go. The sacroiliac joint right in here. Okay. Oops. Let me go back. Basically, just a big joint between the sacrum and the ilium. So when that joint fuses, I basically completed the cage, and that's allowing us to have that protective function from the pelvis. There's a structure in here. It's labeled on your note sheet. It's called the anterior superior iliac spine. It's not labeled on here. I apologize for that. But if you find the point of your hip, this little thing that sticks out the farthest right, kind of right at your belt line. If you ever heard of a hip pointer, basically there's some ligaments that go on and attach in there. That's anterior superior iliac spine. That's what you can feel in there, and you can palpate that or manipulate that with your own hand. There's a big old hole on the side of the pelvis called the acetabulum. This is your hip socket, basically. This is where the head of your femur is going to fit into this big hole, this acetabulum. And that is a huge depression forming another ball and socket joint. And that joint is pretty similar to our shoulder joint. Obviously, it's a lot bigger, a little less range of motion, but again, it's another ball and socket joint that the head of the femur fits into. This big hole right here, where you can see I'm kind of circling it, that's called the obturator foramen. That's the largest foramen in the body. Um, we get these nerves passing through there called the obturator nerves, and some blood vessels pass through there. So we talk about all those tiny little foramen in the head or in the skull. This is a huge foramen going through the pelvis there. Right up front here, we have this little ligament that holds two pubic bones together. So if I go back, remember the pubic bones are the pink right here at the front of the pelvis. They're held together by this thing called the pubic symphysis. Pubic symphysis is what joins them in the front, and again, it forms, kind of helps complete the cage uh, for our pelvis. This is going to be real important, especially in females in childbirth, because that pubic symphysis is going to be able to loosen up and allow the pelvis to stretch a little bit. The ischial tuberosity, you don't need to worry about ischiopubic ramus, but the ischial tuberosity, basically, if I put my pointer here or here, the ischial tuberosity is that spot, the lowest spot on the pelvis, and that's what you're sitting on. Now, there's this thing called the pelvic inlet or the pelvic outlet. Okay. The pelvic inlet or the pelvic brim is the area between the ilium. Okay, so basically, pretend this is a big tunnel. Okay, and I'm going down into the tunnel. Once I reach the walls of the tunnel, which are this upper flared portions of the ilium, that's the pelvic inlet. Okay, pelvic inlet starts at the uh, where the ilium are flared, and I'm kind of going into that tunnel. Then I reach this thing called the true pelvis. So now I get to this narrower opening at the top. This is the true pelvis or the pelvic brim. Okay, the pelvic brim is the beginning of the birth canal. All right, so basically we call this pelvic brim or the pelvic or the true pelvis, excuse me. Now we're if you think of childbirth, the child's head is moving down through the pelvic brim. Okay. Then there, if I was to turn the sacred the pelvis over, you would see something called the pelvic outlet, basically the point at the bottom where the baby is coming out of. Okay. So it's kind of confusing just doing it on a pointer. It's kind of better to do it with the bones, but I have the pelvic brim way up here, or excuse me, pelvic inlet. Then I have the pelvic brim right here where it's starting to form this bony canal or birth canal. The pelvic outlet would be on the bottom side of this. Um, and actually, I made a mistake in that. The mistake is this part up here is the false pelvis. I'm sorry. The part between the two ilium is the false pelvis. So disregard what I said about this. So from here to here is the false pelvis. True pelvis is down here with the pelvic brim or pelvic inlet, and then the pelvic outlet coming out the bottom. Then we get into this. So men and women have different structures or different development of the pelvis because obviously they do different things. A woman's going to have to go through childbirth, um, which is a very big life occurrence, right? And they got to go through some changes. So because of that, the pelvis is actually going to develop differently in men versus women. So just highlighting a couple of these. First of all, males are going to have a deeper and more narrow pelvic inlet and outlet. Okay, so deeper meaning it's longer. This true pelvis is going to be longer, whereas in a woman's or a female's, this is going to be shorter and wider. Here, I want the birth canal to be a little bit wider. Males are going to have a longer, more narrow sacrum or sacrum, whereas females have a wider and shorter sacrum. Um, Females, I'm sorry for this, is going to have a coccyx, which is a little movable and sometimes will break easily during childbirth to open up that um, pelvic outlet, whereas males is going to be a little bit stronger. At the very bottom, between um, the two ischium and pubises, there's this thing called the subpubic angle, or you may see it called the pubic arch. In females, that pubic arch is going to be wider or greater than 90 degrees, whereas in males, it's going to be less than 90 degrees. All right. Um, in females, the pubic symphysis, like I said, will soften before childbirth, allow the birth canal to open up a little bit wider. And a female will have wider set hips. Okay, so the ilium is actually going to be flared a little bit more. And this is going to lead to, again, a little bit wider birth canal. It also could lead to some other structures coming off of this. So, for example, the femur will actually be angled a little bit different in a female than it is compared to a male. Okay, so all these have to do with, well, the difference between males and females through the development and obviously the jobs that they have to do or complete.